Long before the chief priest stood in front of the people of Abodo and announced that the god Ogbunig had chosen Amara to be his bride, she was just a young widow struggling to keep her family alive. 3 years ago, death took the only man she ever loved, leaving her all alone to raise 2 children in a village where life got harder every single day. Since her husband died, Amara had become everything to her kids, their mother, their father, their protector, and their only hope. Every morning before the sun came up, she would carry her old, worn-out basket to the village market, praying she would make enough money to buy at least one meal before coming home. Most days, she managed to do it, but on this particular day, everything changed. As the very first rays of sunlight spread across the quiet village of Abodo, Amara stood silently in the corner of her small kitchen, staring into an empty clay pot. She searched every single corner of the house, hoping to find just a handful of gari, a cup of rice, or even a forgotten yam. There was absolutely nothing, not a single grain of food, not a single coin. For the first time since her husband passed away, Amara had nothing at all to feed her children. Suddenly, a faint cough broke the silence inside the small mud hut. Amara turned around quickly. Her youngest son had just opened his eyes. Still lying on the raffia mat, the little boy rubbed his stomach and looked up at his mother. "Mama," his voice sounded weak. "Is breakfast ready?" The question cut through Amara's heart like a sharp knife. But for a quick second, she forced herself to smile. "It will be ready soon," she replied softly. The boy smiled and closed his eyes again, believing every single word his mother said. Right then, his older sister sat up. Unlike her little brother, she was old enough to know what was really going on. She had seen her mother searching every corner of the kitchen. She had seen the empty clay pot. She had also seen the tears Amara quickly wiped away before anyone could notice. Quietly, she walked over to her mother. "Mama? We don't have food again, do we?" Amara looked away. She couldn't bring herself to answer the question. Instead, she gently held her daughter's face in her hands. "I'm going to the market. I won't come back until I find something for both of you to eat." The little girl nodded bravely. "We'll wait for you." Amara smiled, but that smile vanished the moment she stepped outside the hut. She leaned against the mud wall and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she had made a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her worn-out basket, balanced it on her head, and started the long walk to the village market, praying that somehow today would be different. She had no way of knowing it yet, but before the sun went down, desperation would push her to her limits. And before midnight arrived, someone, or something, would hear the cry of a heartbroken mother. The village market was already busy and full of life by the time Amara got there. Women were calling out to people passing by. Children were running around between the stalls. The smell of roasted corn and freshly cooked beans filled the air. To anyone looking, it just seemed like another busy day at the market. Amara quickly set up the few vegetables she had managed to harvest the evening before. She arranged them neatly, hoping they would look nice to buyers. As the first customers started coming in, she greeted every one of them with a warm smile. "Good morning, my sister. Come and buy fresh vegetables. They are very cheap." A few people stopped. They looked at the vegetables. They asked how much they cost. Then, they walked away. Amara sighed quietly. Minutes turned into hours. The hot afternoon sun beat down on her without mercy. One by one, the traders around her started celebrating their sales. Some had already packed up their things and were heading home with big smiles on their faces. But Amara just sat there. The vegetables in her basket looked like they hadn't even been touched. Just then, an elderly woman walked up to her stall. "My daughter," the old woman said kindly. "How much for everything?" Hope rushed back into Amara's eyes. She quickly told her the price. The woman reached into the wrapper tied around her waist to get her money, but suddenly stopped. "Oh. I completely forgot my money at home. I am so sorry. I will come back for it." But she never did. Amara watched the old woman disappear into the crowd. That was the closest she came to selling anything all day. As the sun slowly started to set, she counted the money in her hand. It was just 3 small coins. It wasn't enough to buy rice. It wasn't enough to buy gari. It wasn't even enough to buy a single loaf of bread. She stared at the coins for a long time before slowly closing her fist. For the first time since she set up her stall that morning, Amara realized she was going home empty-handed. By the time Amara left the market, the sun was already sinking behind the tall trees surrounding Abodo. After counting the few coins she had managed to make, she stopped at a small roadside shop and bought the only thing she could afford, a small cup of gari. No sugar. No milk. Not even groundnuts. As she walked back home, she silently prayed that this would be enough to quiet her children's hunger, even if it was just for one night. The moment she stepped inside the hut, her 2 kids ran toward her. Their happy, hopeful smiles dropped the second they saw the tiny cup in her hands. Without saying a word, Amara poured the gari into a bowl, added some water, and stirred it slowly. There was no sugar to make it sweet, and no milk to make it rich. It was just plain gari and water. The 3 of them sat down on the floor. Nobody said a word. The only sound inside the little hut was the soft clicking of the spoon against the bowl. Each child took a few spoonfuls and then quietly passed the bowl back to their mother. They pretended they were full. Amara knew they were lying, so she lied too. "I'm not hungry," she whispered with a fake smile. "You two finish it." The children looked at each other. Then, without saying anything else, they did what she said. That night, hunger made them fall asleep much earlier than usual. Amara waited until she heard their gentle breathing fill the room. Then, she quietly stood up, wrapped her old cloth around her shoulders, and stepped out into the cold night air. The village was completely silent. Only the distant sound of crickets echoed through the darkness. She looked up at the sky full of stars. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Then, with tears pouring down her cheeks, she finally spoke. "Father, I don't even know how to pray anymore. I have prayed every single day since my husband died. I have cried. I have gone without food. I have trusted you. But every day, life only gets harder." Her voice broke. "My children are hungry. They smile just so I won't feel bad. But I know they are suffering. They deserve better than this." She slowly dropped to her knees. What kind of mother cannot even feed her own children? She started crying even harder. "I've gone from house to house. I've walked until my hands could no longer carry a basket. I've done everything I know how to do. So tell me, what else do you want from me?" Silence. No answer came. Amara lowered her head. Then, she whispered the words she never thought she would ever say. "I don't care anymore. I don't care who answers me, as long as my children don't die of hunger." Suddenly, the wind stopped blowing. The crickets stopped singing. A strange, unnatural silence covered the night. But Amara didn't notice any of it. She wiped her tears, stood up slowly, and went back inside the hut. Within minutes, she was fast asleep, completely unaware that someone else had heard every single word she said. Midnight came quietly. The whole village of Abodo was asleep in the dark. Not a single lamp was burning. Not a single voice could be heard. Only the whisper of the wind moved through the lonely paths. Then, knock. A single knock echoed from outside Amara's door. Inside the little hut, Amara stayed fast asleep. A few moments passed. Again, knock. The sound wasn't loud or scary. It was calm and patient, like whoever was standing outside knew there was no need to rush. Suddenly, the wind died down. The crickets stopped singing. Even the leaves on the trees stood perfectly still. For a brief second, it felt like the whole village was holding its breath. Then, morning arrived. The very first rays of sunlight came through the small window of Amara's hut. She stretched her tired body and quietly stood up, making sure she didn't wake her kids. As she opened the wooden door, she froze. Sitting neatly right on her doorstep was a large clay pot. It was covered and still hot. Fresh steam was coming out from under the lid. Amara looked to the left. Nobody was there. She looked to the right. The narrow path was completely empty. Confused, she stepped outside and looked at the ground. There were no footprints. Not even a single mark of bare feet in the soft dirt. It was like the pot had just appeared out of nowhere. Slowly, her shaking hands reached for the lid. Amara slowly lifted the cover. Her eyes went wide. Inside the clay pot was steaming white rice, rich vegetable soup, and 2 pieces of smoked fish. The delicious smell filled the morning air. For a moment, she just stared at it. It had been a very long time since she had seen so much food. She looked around again. The path was still empty. Who could have done this? She whispered. Just then, her little boy ran outside, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Mama. He suddenly stopped. His eyes fell right on the clay pot. His face lit up with excitement. Mama. There's food. Before Amara could even answer, her daughter stepped outside too. She looked at the food, and then looked at her mother. Did someone bring this? Amara slowly shook her head. I don't know. The little boy smiled. Maybe God answered your prayer. Those words cut deep into Amara's heart. She looked up at the sky. Could this really be God's answer? She waited. Maybe the person who brought it would come back. Minutes passed, but nobody came. She walked over to the nearest neighbor's house and asked if anyone had left food outside her door. Everyone shook their heads. She asked another neighbor. Again, the answer was no. Soon, news spread around the village that someone had mysteriously left food for the widow. Some villagers smiled and said, it must be a secret helper. Others just shrugged and said, what matters is that the children can finally eat. Amara looked down at the hot, steaming meal one more time. She silently folded her hands together. Whoever you are, may God reward your kindness. With tears of gratitude in her eyes, she carried the clay pot inside. Amara then carefully served the food into 3 small bowls. The delicious smell filled the little hut. It had been months since such a wonderful meal had been inside their home. Her youngest son just couldn't stop smiling. Mama, does this mean things will be better now? Amara forced a smile. I hope so, my son. The children happily started eating. They laughed and teased each other about who got the bigger piece of fish. For the first time in a very long time, their little home was full of laughter again. Amara watched them quietly, her heart completely full of gratitude. Before taking her very first bite, she closed her eyes. Whoever you used to bless my family, please bless them even more. Only then did she start to eat. The meal tasted better than anything she had eaten in years. It was fresh, warm, and perfectly cooked. It wasn't too much, and it wasn't too little. It was just enough for the 3 of them. By the time they finished eating, every single bowl was empty. Her little boy stretched happily. Mama, I don't think I'll ever be hungry again. Amara laughed softly and gently rubbed his head. I pray so. The children spent the rest of the afternoon playing outside, their strength completely back. As Amara looked at the empty clay pot, she stopped. Something caught her eye. There was no black soot at the bottom of it. There was no sign that it had ever sat on a cooking fire. No ashes at all. It looked brand new, like it had never been used before. She frowned for a quick second, then smiled at herself. What am I even thinking? She rinsed the pot out and placed it neatly right next to the kitchen wall. By evening, life had gone back to normal. Or, at least, that's what she thought. The next morning, Amara woke up before the sun came up. As she quietly walked into the kitchen, her eyes fell straight on the clay pot she had washed the night before. It was sitting exactly where she had left it. She smiled. Today, I'll find out who owns you. She bent down to pick it up, but then she stopped. The pot felt heavy, much heavier than before. A strange feeling came over her. Slowly, she lifted the lid, and her eyes went wide. The pot was completely full again. The food was fresh and still steaming, like it had just been taken off the fire. Amara's hand started to shake. "No," she whispered. "This can't be." She quickly looked around the kitchen. Nobody was there. She rushed outside, but the compound was totally empty. She searched behind the hut. Nothing. She went back inside and stared at the pot again. The food was still hot, and the rich smell filled the room. There was no mistake about it, this was the exact same clay pot she had washed last night. She recognized the tiny crack near one of the handles. Yet, somehow, it had filled itself up again. Amara stood perfectly still. Fear told her to throw the pot away, but hunger told her to open it. For the first time, she didn't know which voice to listen to. Slowly, she picked up the pot and carried it outside. She walked over to the nearest neighbor's house. Mama Ngozi. The elderly woman looked up from sweeping her yard. "My daughter, you're up early." Amara placed the pot on the ground. "Mama Ngozi, did you leave this food at my house?" The old woman frowned. "No." Amara hesitated. "Did you send someone?" Again, the old woman shook her head. "I thought maybe one of the women in the village wanted to help me." Mama Ngozi smiled gently. "If I had extra food, would gladly help you, my daughter. But this didn't come from me." Amara thanked her quietly and walked back home. She visited another neighbor, and then another. Everyone gave her the exact same answer. Nobody knew where the food was coming from. By the middle of the day, the strange gift was all anyone could talk about in Obodo. Some people believed a rich stranger was secretly helping the widow. Others said one of the village elders must have felt sorry for her family. Amara wanted to believe that too. After all, who questions a blessing after praying so hard for one? With tears of gratitude in her eyes, she carried the clay pot back into her house. That evening, her children laughed louder than they had in years. And for the first time since her husband died, Amara went to bed with hope in her heart. She had no idea that hope can sometimes look exactly like a trap. Days turned into weeks. Every morning before sunrise, Amara woke up to the exact same unbelievable sight. The clay pot was always waiting for her, always full, and always warm. No matter where she hid it, it somehow found its way back to the exact same corner of her kitchen. Before long, hunger became nothing more than a painful memory. Her children were laughing again. Their cheeks, which used to be hollow from starving, slowly became full and healthy. The fear that had lived inside Amara's heart for years started to fade away. Every night before going to sleep, she thanked God for remembering her. She never questioned the miracle again, but not everyone in Obodo shared her happiness. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Shinya stopped by to visit. She had watched Amara grow up from a little girl into a woman, and she loved her just like her own daughter. As soon as Shinya stepped into the kitchen, she suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes locked right onto the clay pot. The smile completely vanished from her face. Slowly, she walked closer to it. Without saying a word, she reached out her shaking hand, but then she quickly pulled it back. Her whole body started to tremble. "Amara," her voice was so low it was barely a whisper. "Where did you get this pot?" Amara smiled. "I don't know. It just showed up one morning full of food, and every single day since then, it fills itself back up." The old woman's face went completely pale. "What did you just say?" Amara laughed softly. "I know it sounds impossible, but it's the truth." Shinya took 3 slow steps backward. Her breathing became heavy and loud. "No. No. This cannot be happening." Before Amara could even ask her what was wrong, the old woman turned around and rushed out of the house without saying another word. Amara just stood there, totally confused. She had never seen Mama Shinya look so terrified in her life. As the old woman hurried farther and farther down the lonely village path, Amara just watched her disappear into the distance. She had absolutely no idea that by this exact time tomorrow, everything she believed about the mysterious clay pot was going to change forever.